I found my daughter-in-law in my business partner's arms the night before I was supposed to sign everything over to them. My son grabbed my arm from the shadows before I could move. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, not yet. I already know. And trust me, it is so much worse than what you're seeing right now. If you have ever poured 30 years of your life into something, only to watch the people closest to you try to pick its bones clean, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Robert Calloway, but everyone just calls me Bob. I am 67 years old, and I spent the better part of my adult life turning 400 square feet of garage space in Knoxville, Tennessee into a regional chain of hardware and building supply stores that stretched across 6 states. Calloway Supply. If you have ever fixed a roof in the South or laid tile in a kitchen in the Carolinas, there is a good chance you bought the materials from one of my stores. I was not born with money. I was born with calluses and the kind of stubbornness that either kills a man or makes him rich. Fortunately for me, it was the latter. My wife, Patricia, stood beside me for 28 of those 30 years. She is gone now. Breast cancer, 6 years ago. The kind of loss that does not heal so much as it slowly changes shape, settling into the walls of you like something structural. After she passed, the stores kept me alive, the work kept me breathing, and my son Nathan kept me human. Nathan is a good man. 39 years old, contractor by trade, built like a man who earns his living with his hands. He married Diane 3 years ago at a vineyard outside Asheville, and I will tell you honestly, I had a good feeling about her. She was warm and attentive, always asking how I was feeling, always offering to help with things around the house. She called me by my first name, which I liked. None of that stiff formality. She felt like family. But feelings, as I have come to learn, are the most expensive thing a man can invest in. My business partner for 15 years was a man named Marcus Webb. We met when I was still operating out of 2 locations, and he was a commercial real estate broker with a talent for sniffing out undervalued strip mall properties. He helped me expand. He handled the real estate side of the operation while I ran the merchandise and operations. On paper, he owned 40% of the holding company. In practice, I trusted him the way you trust someone who has sat across from you at a table during every hard conversation for a decade and a half and never once flinched. I had been considering retirement, not full retirement, the gradual kind, where you start transferring operational control while you still have enough energy to see that it is done right. My plan was to bring Nathan in formally as a partner, restructure the holding company, and give Diane a role in marketing since she had a background in brand management. I had spent the better part of 8 months working with my attorney, Carol Simmons, on the transition documents. We were close to finalizing everything. The signing was scheduled for the following morning. It was a Tuesday night in late November when everything fell apart and came back together at the same time. I could not sleep. That happens more than I would like to admit at my age. There is a particular kind of restlessness that lives in men who have spent their lives building things, a need to be doing something even when the body says otherwise. I got up around midnight, pulled on a jacket, and drove the 20 minutes from my house out to the Knoxville flagship location. I had a habit of doing that when I could not sleep, walking the aisles, checking inventory, standing in the dark among the lumber and the power tools. It sounds strange, but it calmed me. That store was the first one. It still smelled like sawdust and machine oil, and that smell had meant safety to me for decades. The parking lot should have been empty. Instead, I saw Marcus's car parked near the rear entrance, the one that only managers and senior staff had the key code for. I sat in my truck for a moment, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe he had stopped by to pick something up. Maybe there was an issue with one of the contractors who used our commercial account. I told myself several reasonable things. I got out of the truck. I entered through the side door I had a key for and made my way through the back hallway toward the main office suite. The door to my private office was ajar. The light inside was on. I could hear voices, low and deliberate. The kind of voices people use when they believe no one is listening. I pushed the door open far enough to see inside. Marcus was standing behind my desk. Not sitting, standing, with the kind of easy ownership that a person only assumes in a space they have already decided is theirs. He had my filing cabinet open, the one with the physical copies of the ownership documents, the original deeds, the corporate charter. Diane was at my computer, typing quickly, her eyes on the screen. Neither of them heard me. Marcus said something I did not catch at first, and Diane laughed quietly. Then she said, "The notary confirmed for 10 a.m. Once he signs the restructure documents tomorrow morning, we file the competency motion by noon." She leaned back in the chair. "And if he does not sign, we file it anyway. Carol's the one who drafted the documents. She does not know what she is actually helping us build." Marcus slid a folder back into the cabinet and closed it. "By the time he figures out what the competency filing means, the court date is already set. His own doctor is on record saying he has been showing signs of cognitive decline." He paused. "Did you take care of that?" "Handled months ago," Diane said. 3 separate appointments where I accompanied him. I did all the talking. I kept interrupting him, correcting him. The doctor noted that he seemed confused and deferential. "It is all in the file." I felt the blood drain from my face and then rush back twice as hot. Cognitive decline. She had manufactured a medical record. She had sat in those appointments with me, the ones where I had gone in for routine checkups after some dizziness I had been having, and she had performed. She had made me look like a man losing his grip while I sat right there not understanding what was happening around me. I took a step toward the door. A hand closed around my forearm from the dark hallway. I spun around. Nathan. My son was standing behind me in the dark, still in his work jacket, sawdust on his boots. He shook his head once, slowly. He pointed back the way I came and held one finger to his lips. I stared at him. He looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not panic. It was not anger. It was the cold, measured look of someone who has already been through the worst of it privately and come out the other side. He pulled me gently but firmly back down the hallway, around the corner, and out through the side door into the cold night air. For a moment I could not speak. I stood in the parking lot staring at the gravel and trying to remember how to breathe like a normal person. "Nathan," I started. "I know, Dad," he said quietly. "I know all of it." I looked at my son. "How long?" 6 weeks, he said. I found a message on her laptop. She left it open. I almost did not look, and then I did, and I wish I had not seen it, and I am also glad I did. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It goes deeper than you think. Marcus is not just helping her. He has been planning this for over a year. The competency filing, the restructure documents, the doctor's appointments. Dad, they have been setting this up since before she even suggested you consider stepping back." The cold air hit me fully then. I thought about who had first brought up the idea of transitioning control. I thought about the casual dinner conversation where Diane had said, gently and with apparent concern, that I seemed tired, that I had worked so hard, that I deserved to rest. I had thought it was kindness. I was the mark. Nathan drove me to a diner off the highway that was open all night. The kind of place where the coffee tastes like it has been on the burner since the first Bush administration and nobody asked questions. We sat in a booth in the back, and he told me everything. He had hired a private investigator 4 weeks after finding the messages, a woman named Sandra Price, who worked out of Nashville and specialized in corporate fraud cases. What she had found was not a simple affair and a scheme. It was a coordinated theft, documented and deliberate. Marcus had taken out 3 personal loans against his ownership stake in the holding company, using inflated appraisals from a real estate firm he had quietly brought into his pocket. He had been siphoning operational funds through a vendor account that did not exist, roughly $18,000 a month for the better part of 2 years. Diane had been managing the communications between Marcus and a boutique law firm in Atlanta that was preparing to challenge my competency in probate court the moment the restructure documents were signed. Once the documents were signed and the competency challenge was filed, they would freeze all decisions pending court review. With Marcus holding 40% and having effective control of Diane through Nathan's stake, they would have majority standing. The court would appoint a guardian to manage my affairs. They had already identified who that guardian would be, a name I did not recognize, But Sandra Price had traced back to an LLC Marcus had helped fund 3 years ago. They were not just trying to steal the company. They were trying to bury me alive inside it, to turn me into a figurehead in my own house while they emptied the rooms. The total value of what they were attempting to take. A business I had built and operated for 30 years, currently valued at just over $4 million. The work of my entire life. Nathan had not told me sooner because Sandra had advised him to wait until she had the documentation to make it bulletproof. That was the word she used. Bulletproof. He had sat across from Diane at dinner every night for 6 weeks, knowing what he knew, sleeping in the same bed, carrying that knowledge like a stone in his chest. I looked at my son, and I saw the cost of that on his face. He had aged in a way I had not noticed until that moment. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. Neither of us said anything for a minute. "What do we do?" I asked. "We let them think they won," he said. "We go to the signing tomorrow morning. You sign what you were already planning to sign, except Carol is going to swap one document." He slid a folder across the table. I opened it. Carol Simmons had been my attorney for 11 years. When Nathan had approached her 3 days ago, without telling me, she had spent 48 hours working in quiet fury to construct what I was now reading. The restructure document looked identical to the one I had already reviewed. The cover page, the formatting, the language in the main body, but in the financial disclosures on page 31, buried in the liability schedule, was a line that transferred personal responsibility for the outstanding vendor account debt, the fraudulent loans Marcus had taken out against the company's appraisal, and the accumulated tax liability from the ghost vendor payments directly to the signatures on the acceptance line. If Marcus and Diane signed that document, they were not inheriting a business. They were inheriting a federal tax problem and roughly $230,000 in fraudulent debt exposure with their own names attached to it. The moment they countersigned, the liability was personal, not corporate. Carol had also drafted a letter to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation that was already sitting on her desk, signed and ready to send. It outlined every detail Sandra Price had documented. It named the Atlanta law firm. It identified the phantom vendor account. It included the conversation I had overheard, which I had spent 2 minutes recording on my phone before Nathan had pulled me away. "There is one more thing," Nathan said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and put something on the table. It was a small pin, the kind you clip to a lapel. "Sandra says the audio quality on a phone recording from a distance is not going to be clean enough for federal court, but this gets clean audio within 30 feet. Wear it tomorrow. Let them talk when they think everything is done." I picked up the pin. It was lighter than I expected. "Nathan," I said, "I should have been the one to find this. I should have been the one to protect you." He looked at me the way his mother used to look at me when I said something she found both frustrating and endearing. "You built something worth protecting, Dad," he said. "Now let me protect it." I barely slept. When I arrived at Carol's office at 9:45 the following morning, I looked exactly like what they expected me to look like, slightly stooped. Slower than usual. I had dressed carefully, choosing an older jacket, a shirt I knew was slightly too big at the collar now, the kind of details that register in a person's mind when they are already primed to see weakness. I had practiced in the mirror. Not the shaking, nothing that dramatic, just the mild vacancy, the slight pause before answering. The way a man looks when he is running on less engine than he used to have. Marcus arrived first. He was wearing a suit I had not seen before. New. He shook my hand with both of his, a gesture that used to feel warm and now felt like a man confirming the dimensions of what he was about to take. He asked how I had slept. I told him not well, which was true. He nodded with exaggerated concern. Diane arrived with Nathan. She was dressed professionally. Carrying a tote bag, she sat down beside her chair with practiced casualness. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I had eaten breakfast. I said I could not remember. She exchanged a glance with Marcus that was so fast and so small that if I had not been watching for it, I would have missed it entirely. Carol laid the documents on the conference table. She went through the overview with the kind of business-like efficiency she had always operated with, directing everyone to the relevant sections, asking if there were questions. Marcus asked a few questions about the asset transfer timeline. Good questions. Specific questions. The questions of a man who had already read the documents he was supposedly seeing for the first time. I noted that. He had a copy somewhere. When it came to my signature, I reached for the pen and then paused, squinting at the page. I asked Carol to read me the paragraph on the first transfer item. Carol read it. I nodded slowly, then asked her to read it again. She did. I signed. The theater of it was working. Diane had relaxed slightly. Her shoulders had dropped a quarter inch. Marcus had stopped pretending to review his own copy and was watching me with barely concealed impatience. The impatience of a man who has been running a very long con and can finally see the exit. When Marcus signed, he barely looked at the page. He signed where the tabs indicated. He initialed where Carol pointed. He moved through the document the way greedy people always move through paperwork. Fast, because they are already spending the money in their heads, and the reading is just the last obstacle between them and the thing they want. Diane signed last. She used a good pen, the one she had brought in her tote bag, as though she had planned to mark this occasion with something deliberate. She pressed down with the full weight of her hand and signed her name in clean, unhurried letters. Carol gathered the documents and slid them into her folio. She said she would file the recorded copies with the county clerk by end of day. Marcus leaned back in his chair and exhaled. He reached over and squeezed Diane's arm. It was not a business gesture. It was the gesture of a man who has been restraining himself and has just decided he does not need to anymore. "Bob," Marcus said, looking at me with a smile I had seen 1,000 times and was only now seeing clearly for the first time. "I want you to know that everything you built is in good hands. You can really rest now." I looked at him. I held his eyes for a moment longer than he expected. Something in my expression must have shifted because his smile flickered. Just slightly. "Yes," I said. "I suppose I can." I reached up and unclipped the lapel pin. I set it on the table in front of me. I watched both of their eyes drop to it. "That is a recording device," I said. My voice was not loud, but it had weight to it. The weight of a man who has been building things for 30 years and knows exactly how load-bearing a single sentence can be. It has been running since I walked in this morning. But the piece I really want you to hear was recorded last night. I took out my phone. The audio I had captured in the hallway of my own store was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Diane's voice. Marcus's voice. The competency filing. The doctor's appointments. Carol had already confirmed with Sandra Price that the recording, combined with the documented evidence, was sufficient. I pressed play. The room went absolutely still. The only sound was the voices of two people who believed they were alone in the dark of a closed building, speaking freely and without consequence about how they intended to dismantle a man's life while he slept. When I stopped the recording, Diane's face had gone the color of old chalk. She was staring at the phone as though she could make it unexist through the force of her will. Marcus tried first. He always was the talker. "Bob, listen. I know how this looks, but there is context." "Marcus," I said, "you have been stealing from this company for 2 years. Sandra Price has the vendor account records, the bank transfer logs, and the loan documentation. Carol has already sent a full package to the TBI. I paused. "And as of about 40 minutes ago, you are also personally liable for $230,000 in fraudulent debt exposure. That is what you just signed for. Not the company. The liability." The color left his face with the completeness of a light being switched off. The document he started was exactly what it said it was, Carol said from across the table, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone who has won arguments professionally for over a decade. "A restructure of the holding company's liability schedule. You accepted those liabilities personally with your signature. The personal guarantee is on page 31. You were given every opportunity to read it." Diane had not said anything. She was looking at Nathan. My son sat with his hands flat on the table, watching his wife with an expression that had moved entirely beyond grief into something quieter and more permanent. "Nathan," she said. Her voice was careful, still looking for an angle. "You know me. Whatever they are telling you, whatever this looks like, I know you," Nathan said. His voice was steady. That is the part that is going to take the longest. She closed her mouth. I stood up. My knees were not what they were at 40. But I stood up straight. And I let myself take up the full space I was entitled to. In the room I had been meeting in for 11 years. I looked at Marcus, who had built a second career in my company's real estate holdings, and had apparently decided that was not enough. I looked at Diane, who had called me by my first name and made it feel like family, and had been counting on my affection the way a hunter counts on a deer's poor eyesight. I want to be clear about something, I said. I am not a confused old man. I never was. I am a man who has been in rooms with people trying to take things from him since I was in my 20s. And the one advantage I have always had is that I understand what I am looking at when I look at it. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. You mistook patience for ignorance. That is an expensive mistake. I nodded to Carol. She opened her office door. 2 men in plainclothes badges were waiting in the hallway. They had been there since 9:30. I did not stay to watch the rest of it. I had already seen everything I needed to see. Nathan and I sat on the tailgate of his truck in the parking lot for a while. The afternoon had gone bright and cold. The kind of November day in Tennessee that is actually beautiful, if you are not too angry to notice it. The trees along the road had mostly given up their color, but a few of the oaks were still holding on, brown and stubborn. He handed me a cup of gas station coffee, which was terrible, and I drank it like it was the best thing I had ever tasted. What happens to the company now? He asked. It is mine, I said. Same as it was yesterday. The restructure documents are null, because the liability swap was undisclosed. Carol will have it untangled by end of week. He nodded and looked at his hands. I knew what he was carrying. Not the legal part, not the business part. The other thing. I am sorry, I said. About Diane. I know you. Don't, he said, but not unkindly. I'll get there. I just need a minute before I have to talk about it. I understood that. Some things do not need to be processed out loud. Some things you just sit with until they change their shape. After a while, I said, You know, your mother always said the hardest part of building something is trusting the people you bring inside it. She said the business part is almost never what takes a man down. It's the human part. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She was right. She usually was, I said. The sun was dropping toward the ridgeline. I thought about 30 years of early mornings and long drives between stores and arguments with suppliers, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has cared too much for too long about something that most people would consider just a business. I thought about what it was worth, not the $4 million. The other thing, the thing you cannot put in a document. There is a version of this story where I stayed quiet, where I was too proud to tell my son I needed help, where I walked into that signing tomorrow morning and handed everything over to 2 people who had never intended to build anything, only to consume what someone else had built. There is a version where I am too far gone to see it coming. That is not the version I lived. I finished my terrible coffee. I crumpled the cup and put it in the bed of the truck. I looked at my son, who has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and who spent 6 weeks carrying something unbearable because he decided that protecting me was worth the weight of it. You hungry? I asked. Yeah, he said. Let's go get some dinner, I said. Somewhere that is not a gas station. He laughed. It was a short, tired laugh, but it was real. We got in the truck and drove toward the lights of the city, leaving the parking lot and everything that had happened in it behind us in the dark. I want to say one thing before I go. The people who try to take from you are almost never strangers. They are almost always people you chose. People you invited in. People you believed when there was no particular evidence to support it beyond the fact that you wanted to. That is not a character flaw. That is what it means to build a life with other people in it. The risk is the cost of entry. But do not ever let anyone tell you that being taken advantage of means you should have known better, or that your trust was a weakness, or that the appropriate response to being deceived is to stop trusting people entirely. The appropriate response is to understand what you are looking at when you look at it, to take your time before you sign anything, and to raise children who look out for you the way you looked out for them when they could not look out for themselves. I am 67 years old. I have a chain of hardware stores that is still standing. I have a son who is the best man I know. And somewhere in Nashville, a woman named Sandra Price is still billing by the hour, and she is worth every penny. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Revenge Chronicles for more stories from people who refuse to go quietly, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. You might be surprised how many of us are out there.